The wagon wheel hit ice beneath fresh snow. Thomas Brennan felt the lurch before he heard the crack. Everything slowed, supplies sliding, his three sons crying out, the world tilting wrong. His shoulder slammed frozen ground hard enough to steal his breath. Pain exploded white-hot through his left side. When he looked up, three small faces stared down at him from the wagon bed backlit by dying afternoon light. Snow was already collecting on their eyelashes. Their breath hung visible in the air, small clouds of warmth fighting against December cold. "Papa," Daniel's voice cracked. He was 10, trying to be brave, failing. The boy's hands gripped the wagon edge so tight his knuckles had gone white. Tom pushed himself up with his good arm. The shoulder screamed protest. He'd wrenched it badly, maybe cracked something. Through the thickening snow, he could see the wagon lying on its side, one wheel spinning uselessly against gray sky. The axle he could see, even through the white curtain falling around them, was cracked clean through. Split wood and bent iron beyond any quick repair. Everyone out. Careful now. They climbed down one by one, small hands gripping wagon sides for balance. Daniel first, then Samuel, then Benjamin. 5 years old, Benny looked like he might cry, but didn't. Good boys. Beth had raised good boys before Tom stopped the thought cold. Couldn't go there. Not now. Not with his sons' lives depending on clear thinking. He walked around the wagon calculating. 15 miles to the nearest settlement. Temperature dropping fast had been dropping all afternoon. The blizzard that had been threatening since noon was here now, swallowing the Montana landscape in white. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind cut through their coats like they were made of paper. "Can you fix it?" Sam asked. 7 years old, still believing his father could fix anything. Still trusting that Papa knew what to do. Tom looked at the broken axle, then at his sons. They were already shivering despite their heavy coats. He'd taken this Christmas Eve supply run to avoid the empty house back at the ranch, to escape the memories of Beth in every corner. The way she'd hum while cooking, the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, the empty chair at the table where she used to sit. 1 year and 6 months since she'd died, bringing their fourth child into the world. 1 year and 6 months of barely holding everything together, of burning meals and forgetting to mend clothes and watching his boys become quieter, smaller versions of themselves. And now his grief, his cowardice in running from an empty house on Christmas Eve might kill his sons. Tom knew the numbers. He'd learned them working for Northern Pacific Railroad, laying track through these territories. In 10 degrees below zero with wind chill like this, hypothermia would set in within 90 minutes for a grown man. For children, especially the younger ones, it would come faster. 60 minutes, maybe 45. And this wagon lying on its side offered no protection from the wind that was starting to howl across the open plain. "We can't stay with the wagon," he said, forcing his voice steady. "We'll freeze." "But where do we go?" Daniel's eyes were too old for 10. He'd grown up fast since Beth died, taking on responsibilities no child should carry. Helping his father with Sam and Benny. Trying to be the man of the house when Tom fell apart. Tom had no answer. Stay here and freeze for certain, or walk blind into the storm and maybe freeze anyway. Some choice for a father to give his sons on Christmas Eve. But at least walking gave them a chance. Staying was death, slow and cold and certain. "We stay together," Tom said, reaching for Daniel's hand. "Hold hands. Don't let go for anything. You understand nothing makes you let go." He was pulling the boys close, preparing to pick a direction and pray, when Benny pointed into the white darkness with one small mittened hand. "Papa, I see something." Tom squinted into the white darkness, wind burning his eyes. At first nothing, just snow and more snow and the gray-white void of a Montana blizzard. Then there, maybe half a mile distant, maybe less, a faint light, soft and golden against all that white. Could be real. Could be his eyes playing tricks in the snow. Could be their only chance. "Boys, stay close." We walked toward the light. "Don't let go of each other." Daniel took Benny's hand. Sam gripped Daniel's other hand. Tom took Sam's free hand with his good arm, keeping his injured shoulder as still as possible. The pain was constant now, a hot wire running from shoulder to spine. They stepped into white darkness, the light their only prayer. Each step was a battle. Snow had drifted knee-deep in places, thigh-deep in others. Tom half-carried Benny through the worst of it, the boy's legs too short to push through drifts that reached his waist. His injured shoulder protested every movement, but pain didn't matter now. Only forward mattered, only that distant light. Daniel struggled but didn't complain. The boy had learned not to complain this past year, had learned to swallow his own pain to avoid adding to his father's burden. Sam fell twice, snow-filling his coat, his small face going pale with cold. Each time Tom pulled him up with his good arm, checked that all three boys were still with him, kept them moving. Behind them, the wagon disappeared into white. Ahead, the light grew stronger. Not a mirage. Real. Solid. Growing clearer with each painful step. A homestead materialized from the storm like something from a dream. Small but sturdy, built low to the ground against Montana winds. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the gale, and Tom felt something break loose in his chest. Hope. Desperate, painful hope. His fist was raised to knock when the door opened. A woman stood there backlit by firelight. Mid-30s, Tom guessed in that first frozen moment. Work-worn hands, the kind that came from years of frontier labor. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. And eyes that assessed injury and need in a single glance, the kind of assessment that came from training or hard experience or both. Get by the fire, she said. Not a question. A command. The voice of someone used to emergencies, used to making quick decisions that meant the difference between life and death. All of you, now. She pulled them inside, body blocking the door against wind that tried to follow them in. The warmth hit Tom like a physical wall. Heat from a roaring fire from a well-insulated cabin from safety. Benny's teeth were chattering so hard the boy couldn't speak. His lips had started to turn blue at the edges. The woman moved with swift purpose, each action economical and precise. She wrapped the boys in quilts heavy wool that she pulled from a chest, stirred the fire to roaring, adding wood with practiced efficiency. Put coffee on the stove, the kind of real coffee that costs money out here. Set water to heating in a large kettle. All of this in less than a minute, no wasted motion. Every movement spoke of someone who knew exactly what hypothermia looked like and exactly what to do about it. Tom watched her dizzy with relief and pain. His shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. The room swam slightly at the edges. The house was spare but warm, clean, organized. A small pine branch decorated one corner, a Montana Christmas, simple and solitary. 2 candles burning on the mantel, one place setting at the table. She lived alone. On the wall, a framed wedding photograph. The woman and a bearded man, both young, both full of hope. Both dressed in their best clothes, facing a photographer's camera, with the serious expressions people wore for important occasions. The man's hand rested on her shoulder. Her hand covered his. A moment of happiness frozen in time. Sit, she told Tom, pointing to a chair by the fire. Her tone left no room for argument. That shoulder needs looking at. Ma'am, we don't want to impose. We'll just warm up, and then we can. You'll sit or you'll fall. Your choice, Marnis. Tom sat. The room tilted slightly as he did. His vision grayed at the edges for a moment before clearing. The woman brought warm water in a basin, clean cloth that smelled of lye soap. She studied his shoulder with careful fingers, touched professional and sure. She knew what she was doing. This wasn't the first injured man she'd treated. He'd wrenched it badly, she explained as she worked. Possibly cracked something, maybe damaged the rotator cuff. But nothing broken. The bone was intact. Ice and compression for the first day, then gentle movement to prevent it freezing up. She wrapped it with strips of clean cloth movements, practiced and efficient. You're lucky, she said, her voice matter of fact. Could have been worse. Could have broken the collarbone or shattered the socket. You'd have lost use of the arm. By the fire wrapped in quilts that smelled of cedar and lavender. Benny whispered something to Sam. Tom couldn't hear the words over the wind hammering at the walls, but he saw the woman's hands still for just a moment at the basin. She'd heard. Whatever Benny had said, she'd heard it. Coffee? She asked Tom, not meeting his eyes. Her voice had gone careful neutral. Yes, ma'am, thank you. She poured 2 cups, handed him one. Their fingers brushed for just an instant. Both pulled back quickly, that awkward dance of strangers aware of propriety. The coffee was hot and strong and real, not the chicory blend some frontier families may do with. Tom wrapped his good hand around the cup and felt warmth seep into fingers that had gone numb. Outside, the storm howled. Wind screamed around the corners of the cabin, rattling shutters, seeking any crack or gap to exploit. Inside, something else stirred, something dangerous and unfamiliar and impossible to name. The woman knelt to bandage his shoulder movements, gentle and sure. Tom found himself watching her face, the concentration there, the care she took with the stranger and his sons. Their eyes met for 3 heartbeats. Both looked away. The moment stretched, uncomfortable and electric at once. Tom cleared his throat. The woman stood quickly, turning back to her stove. "What's your name?" Benny asked suddenly, his voice small but curious. The boy had stopped shivering enough to speak. Color was returning to his cheeks. The woman glanced at him, and her expression softened in a way that made Tom's chest tight. "Catherine," she said. "Most folks call me Kate." "I'm Benny. That's Sam, and that's Danny, and that's Papa." "Thomas," Tom said, finding his voice. "Thomas Brennan. We're grateful, ma'am. More grateful than I can say." "Kate," she corrected, "and there's no gratitude needed for following the law." Tom understood. Light in the window means nobody rides past. It was the unwritten law of Montana Territory, written in the blood and bones of those who died alone. When a blizzard came, when the temperature dropped, when the snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, you put a light in the window. And if someone came to your door, you let them in. No questions, no payment expected. Because next time, it might be you out there in the storm. Next time, you might be the one needing shelter. The storm was too bad to talk about leaving tonight. Kate said it without saying it, in the way she started pulling out food for supper, in the way she glanced at the darkening window and then at the boys. Tom knew it too. They were staying the night. Had to. Going back out there now would be murder. "Storm's too bad to talk about leaving tonight," Kate said, making it official. "You'll stay. I'll make supper." It wasn't an offer. It was frontier law, and Tom was grateful beyond words. Kate moved to the stove, and Tom watched his sons watch her. They'd seen neighbor women since Beth died. Plenty of them. Mrs. Hartford from town bringing casseroles and pitying looks. Mrs. Coleman from the next ranch over, trying to help in her awkward way. But none of them moved like this. None of them had this quality of being purposeful and gentle and present all at once. None of them felt like someone who'd been alone a long time and remembered what it meant to care for others. Kate made stew from what she had. Potatoes, carrots, onions, a bit of salt pork. Simple food. Frontier food. But the way she prepared it, the care she took, made it something more. She added herbs from dried bundles hanging by the window. Sage and thyme and something else Tom couldn't identify. The smell filled the cabin, rich and warm and alive. The boys ate like they hadn't had a proper meal in months. And truth was, they hadn't. Tom had been burning everything lately, too distracted by grief to focus on cooking, too lost in memories to measure ingredients or watch temperatures. The boys had learned to eat what was put in front of them without complaint, to be grateful for food even when it was charred or undercooked or bland. But this was different. This was food made with attention and care. Food made by someone who understood that a meal could be an act of love. "Slowly, Benny," Kate said gently when the boy started to gulp his stew. "You'll make yourself sick." Benny obeyed instantly, slowing his eating to careful spoonfuls. Tom saw Sam and Danny do the same, responding to her gentle authority. They responded to her in a way they hadn't responded to anyone since Beth died. Some quality in her voice, some gentleness that didn't feel like pity, made them want to please her, made them want to be the good boys their mother had raised them to be. After supper, Kate set the boys to exploring with permission. She made it clear they could look but shouldn't touch without asking. They found one bedroom simply furnished. A small loft accessible by ladder, swept clean and empty. No children's items anywhere in the house. No toys, no small clothes, no signs that children had ever lived here. On the wall, that framed wedding photograph drew Daniel's eyes. The boy stared at it for a long moment before turning to Kate. "Your husband?" he asked, voice careful. Tom started to scold him for prying, but Kate shook her head slightly. She didn't seem offended by the question. Instead, she looked at the photograph with an expression Tom couldn't quite read. Sadness, yes, but something else too. Acceptance, maybe. Or resignation. 3 years ago, she said quietly. Winter fever took him. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, and Tom heard real sympathy in his son's voice. The boy knew what it meant to lose someone, knew the shape of that particular grief. Kate touched his hair just once. A brief contact there and gone. Thank you. She began clearing dishes, and Tom stood to help, but his shoulder protested the movement sharply enough to make him gasp. Kate pointed him back to the chair with a look that brooked no argument. You're injured. Sit. Ma'am, we're imposing enough without. You're surviving. There's a difference. Sam was examining the loft ladder, testing its sturdiness with the careful curiosity of a 7-year-old. Benny had found a small carved bird on the windowsill, was turning it over in his hands with the kind of wonder children reserve for truly beautiful things. The bird was exquisite, each feather carved with patient detail. Oak, Tom thought, or maybe maple. Polished smooth by handling. Put that back, Tom said, concerned his son would break it. It's all right, Kate said from the basin where she was washing dishes. I made it. Winter project. You carved this? Benny's eyes went wide with amazement. He looked from the bird to Kate and back again, as if trying to reconcile this beautiful object with the woman who'd made it. Kate nodded. Benny carefully returned the bird to its place, treating it like something precious and fragile. His small fingers lingered on it for just a moment before he pulled his hand back. Tom looked at the windowsill more closely and saw other birds there. 5 of them in total, each different. A sparrow, a chickadee, what might have been a meadowlark, each carved with the same patient detail, the same careful attention. These weren't just crafts, these were art. These were the work of someone who'd spent long winters alone, who'd needed something to occupy hands and mind, who'd needed to create beauty to survive the isolation. When full dark came, the storm was still raging. If anything, it had intensified. The wind no longer howled, it screamed. Kate announced sleeping arrangements with the same practical authority she'd shown all evening. The boys would take her bed, she'd take the loft. Tom would take the chair by the fire. His shoulder needed heat, needed to stay warm and mobile. Benny looked at the bed, then at Kate, and his small face took on an expression Tom knew well. The expression that meant the boy was about to ask her something he needed desperately, but wasn't sure he was allowed to have. Will you stay? Benny asked, voice small. Just till I'm asleep. Tom started to tell him no, to explain that Miss Kate had already done enough, that they couldn't impose further, that boys their age should be able to sleep without needing someone to watch over them. But Kate was already moving, already understanding what Tom in his grief had forgotten. That children who'd lost their mother needed more than food and shelter. They needed the presence of care. They needed to feel watched over and safe. She sat on the bed's edge without a word. Benny climbed in first, burrowing under quilts that smelled of cedar. Then Sam, moving slowly, uncertain. Then Daniel, the oldest, trying to act like he didn't need this but climbing in anyway. One by one they arranged themselves around her, not touching her exactly but close, drawn to her warmth like cold travelers to a fire. Kate began singing softly, voice barely above a whisper, an old hymn one Tom recognized. One Beth used to sing while she worked around the house, while she put the boys to bed, while she lived and breathed and existed in the world. Now Beth was gone, and this stranger was singing her song, and Tom's throat closed so tight he couldn't breathe. He turned away, returned to the fire. Behind him, his son's breathing slowed, steadied, deepened. Kate's voice continued quiet and sure, singing his dead wife's songs to his living sons. The storm battered the walls, but inside there was peace. Inside there was something Tom hadn't felt in 18 months, something that felt dangerously like home. He lay awake long after the singing stopped, long after Kate climbed quietly to the loft, moving with practiced silence in the darkness. His shoulder ached with each heartbeat, but that wasn't what kept him wakeful. That wasn't what made sleep impossible. The storm had forced them here, accident and weather and broken wagon wheels. But watching his sons with Kate, seeing them transform into who they used to be, seeing them laugh and be curious and let their guard down, Tom realized something terrifying. The storm hadn't just brought them to shelter, it had brought them home. And come morning when the storm cleared, he'd have to take them away from it. He'd have to lead them back to that empty ranch house where Beth's ghost lived in every corner. Back to half-burned meals and uncomfortable silences and the slow suffocation of grief that had become their normal. Tom lay by the fire and listened to the wind and knew that morning would come too soon. That the light of day would show him the path back to his responsibilities, back to his empty house, back to the life he'd been barely surviving. And he didn't know if he had the strength to walk that path again. Didn't know if he could take his sons away from the first real warmth they'd felt in a year and a half. But what choice did he have? Kate Wells was a stranger, a woman who'd shown them kindness because frontier law demanded it. She'd done her duty. She'd given them shelter from the storm. But that didn't mean she wanted them to stay. Didn't mean she wanted a broken widower and his 3 damaged sons cluttering up her carefully ordered, solitary life. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Tom Brennan wrestled with something bigger than weather, wrestled with the terrible knowledge that sometimes survival wasn't enough, that sometimes living meant more than just breathing and eating and going through the motions, that his sons needed more than he'd been giving them, needed more than he knew how to give. Morning came too soon and too slow at once. Tom woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. Kate was already up, had been up for who knew how long, moving quietly so as not to wake the boys. The storm had weakened but not stopped. Gray light filtered through the window, cold and thin. "Morning," Kate said, not looking at him. "Coffee, please." She handed him the cup. This time their fingers didn't touch. Both were careful. Both knew something had shifted in the night, some boundary had been crossed, and neither knew quite what to do about it. "How's the shoulder?" "Better, thank you." They sat in awkward silence. Outside, wind still howled, but gentler now. The worst had passed. The knowledge hung between them unspoken. By afternoon, maybe evening, the storm would be over. Tom could attempt to get his wagon to town, get it repaired, get his sons home before Christmas was completely past. "Light in the window means nobody rides past," Kate said suddenly, voice careful. "That's frontier law." "Yes, ma'am." "So you'll stay until the storm's fully done, no arguments?" Tom nodded. Part of him, the part that terrified him, was grateful for the excuse. Grateful for frontier law that said he had to stay here in this warm cabin with this capable woman who sang his wife's songs and made his children smile. The boys woke gradually. Benny first rubbing his eyes, then breaking into a smile when he saw Kate. That smile hit Tom like a fist to the chest. How long since he'd seen his youngest son smile like that? Bright and unguarded and full of simple joy. Sam next quieter, but watching Kate with the same intensity he gave to everything that interested him. The boy was an observer, had always been. Watching the world, trying to figure out how it worked. Now he was watching Kate with focus that spoke of hunger. Not for food, for something else. Something Tom hadn't been able to provide. Daniel last older and more careful. But Tom saw his face soften when Kate handed him a plate of food. Saw the boy's shoulders relax slightly, the constant tension he'd carried since Beth's death easing just a fraction. "Merry Christmas," Kate said, and Tom had forgotten. Again, it was Christmas Day. December 25th, 1878. The second Christmas without Beth. The second Christmas Tom had tried to ignore, had tried to push through like any other day. After breakfast, Kate disappeared briefly into her room. She returned with 3 small items wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped them one at a time, setting them on the table. Hard candy in a small jar, an orange, precious and expensive, this far from anywhere, and another carved bird twin to the ones on the windowsill. "I made these for," she stopped, drew a breath, started again. "Anyway, Merry Christmas, boys." Tom knew what those gifts meant, knew what they meant. An orange in Montana Territory, in December $3, maybe $4. Brought up by wagon from Salt Lake or beyond, carefully packed, carefully transported. Hard candy was luxury, expensive, and rare. And the bird, hours of work, days maybe, carved with care and attention, made for a child she'd never had. "Ma'am, we can't," Daniel started, understanding without being told that these gifts were precious. "You can," Kate said, voice firm. "Please." Benny took the bird with reverent hands, held it like something holy. Sam clutched the orange-like treasure. Daniel stared at the candy throat working. Then Benny reached into his coat pocket, drew out something small, a river stone, smooth and gray. Tom knew that stone. Beth had given it to Benny before she died, had pressed it into his small hand and told him it was special, told him to keep it safe. Tom had seen his youngest son touch that stone 100 times over the past year and a half, touch it when he was scared, touch it when he was soon, Touch it like a talisman against all the darkness in the world. Now Benny held it out to Kate. For you. Kate's face crumpled. All her careful control, all her frontier toughness collapsed in an instant. She took the stone with shaking hands, closed her fist around it, and cried openly, tears streaming down her face while Benny patted her hand with his small one. It's okay, Benny said in his 5-year-old voice. You can keep it. Kate pulled him into a hug so fierce Tom thought she might never let go. Then Sam was there joining the embrace. Then Daniel, all pretense of being too old for such things, abandoned. All 3 boys and this woman who was a stranger yesterday all tangled together like family, like they'd been doing this forever, like they'd always belonged to each other. Tom watched from across the room, heart breaking open in his chest, breaking in a way that hurt but also felt like healing, like something frozen finally beginning to thaw. After a long while, Kate wiped her eyes, laughing through tears. Well, I haven't cried like that in years. Mama used to cry sometimes, Benny said, voice matter of fact. Papa said it meant her heart was too full. Kate's eyes met Tom's across the room, held there. Neither could look away. Time stretched, that moment expanding to fill the cabin. 2 broken people looking at each other over the heads of 3 motherless boys. 2 people who understood loss in ways no one should have to understand. 2 people who'd been surviving instead of living, getting through days instead of embracing them. Your papa's a wise man, Kate said softly, and Tom heard something in her voice he couldn't name, couldn't let himself name. The afternoon passed in quiet activities. Kate taught Benny to knead bread, her hands covering his small ones, showing him how to fold and press. Tom watched her teach his son with patience Beth would have approved of, would have recognized. Sam helped to set the table, learning where everything went, how to fold napkins, small domestic skills that mattered in ways that went beyond the practical. Daniel split kindling without being asked, working through the woodpile with steady determination. They moved around each other like they'd been doing it for years, like this cabin had always held 5 people instead of 1. Like family was something you could build in a day and a night, given the right circumstances, given the right people, given enough need on all sides. Evening came. Kate made supper, and the boys ate with better manners than they'd shown in months. They wanted to please her, Tom realized. Wanted her good opinion in a way they'd stopped wanting anything except for their mother to come back. After supper, Sam brought Kate a piece of the broken wagon axle that Tom had salvaged from the wreck. Do you know how to fix things? The boy asked, looking up at her with serious eyes. Kate studied the wood, running her fingers along the crack. Tom watched her examine it with the same careful attention she'd given his shoulder, the same practical assessment she brought to everything. Finally, she looked up, not at Sam, but at Tom. I know how to fix most things, she said quietly. Most things just need time and the right care. The words hung in the air between them. Tom knew she wasn't talking about wagon axles anymore. Knew she was talking about something larger and more fragile, something neither of them had the courage to name yet. We should stay forever, Sam announced, and the words landed in the cabin like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward, touching everything. Daniel said nothing, but his eyes found his father's, pleading, begging, desperate. Tom looked away first, couldn't hold his eldest son's gaze, couldn't face the hope there. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. Better to expect nothing. Better to accept what couldn't be changed. But even as he thought it, Tom knew he was lying to himself. Knew that something had shifted in this cabin. Something had changed when Benny gave Kate his mother's riverstone. When Daniel let himself be hugged without resistance. When Sam found the courage to ask questions again. His sons were healing here. In one night and one day, they'd begun to heal. And Tom was going to take them away from it, take them back to that empty ranch house, back to burned meals and uncomfortable silences, back to existing instead of living. Because what choice did he have? None. No choice at all. That night, as Kate stirred supper, Tom stood at the window looking out at the dying storm. The wind had dropped. The snow had slowed to scattered flurries. By morning, the sky would be clear. By morning, he'd have no excuse to stay. Behind him, he heard Kate singing softly as she worked, heard his boys laughing at something Sam said, heard the sounds of family, of home, of life being lived instead of endured. And Tom Brennan, 36 years old widower, father survivor, felt something crack in his chest. Some wall he'd built around his heart this past year and a half. Some defense against feeling anything because feeling meant pain, and pain meant being weak, and being weak meant failing his sons. But here in this cabin on Christmas Day, listening to his children laugh, Tom realized he'd already failed them, had been failing them for 18 months. Because survival wasn't enough, because children needed more than food and shelter. They needed joy. They needed warmth. They needed what this stranger had given them in a single day, what he hadn't been able to give them in a year and a half. The storm outside was ending, but inside Tom Brennan, another storm was just beginning. A storm of realization and regret and desperate, terrified hope. Hope that maybe, possibly, if he had the courage, things could be different, could be better, could be more than just surviving until death finally came as a relief. But courage was in short supply, and morning would come regardless. Morning always came. The second day dawned clear and bright. Sun blazed on endless, white, beautiful, and terrible at once. Beautiful because the storm was over, because they'd survived, because Christmas morning, light painted everything gold and perfect. Terrible because clear weather meant Tom should try to leave, meant frontier law no longer bound them here, meant the excuse was gone. Kate sensed it too. Tom saw her face close, slightly over breakfast, saw her rebuild walls he hadn't noticed coming down. The easy warmth she'd shown the boys yesterday became more careful, more measured. She was protecting herself, he realized, preparing for them to leave, for the cabin to be empty again, for the silence to return. Tom should say something, should acknowledge what was happening, but words stuck in his throat like river stones. What could he say? Thank you for your kindness. We'll be going now. Thank you for showing my sons what happiness feels like, but we have to return to our tomb of a house. The words were impossible. All words were impossible. After breakfast, Tom pulled on his coat and went outside to assess the situation. The cold hit him like a fist sharp and clean after the cabin's warmth. His breath hung in the air crystalline in the bright sunlight. Snow had drifted deep against the cabin walls, smooth curves that looked almost sculptural in the morning light. He walked to where they'd left the wagon following the trail they'd broken yesterday. It felt like a lifetime ago. The wagon lay on its side exactly as they'd left it, half buried in snow, the broken axle exposed and ugly in the daylight. Tom circled it slowly, examining the damage with the knowledge he'd gained working for Northern Pacific Railroad. The brake was clean and complete. Both the wooden core and the iron reinforcement had failed. The wood had been stressed, dried out from summer heat, then shocked by winter cold. When it hit the ice, the whole structure had given way. To fix it properly would require a blacksmith, someone who could forge a new iron sleeve and fit it properly. That meant getting the wagon to town to the smutty. That meant asking for help. Tom stood in the snow and calculated distances. 15 miles to town, another 8 to his ranch. Too far to walk with 3 small boys in this cold, even in clear weather. The temperature had to be near zero, maybe below. Without the wind, it was bearable, but only just. Trying to walk that distance would risk frostbite, would risk exposure if clouds rolled back in. He needed help. Needed a neighbor with a draft horse who could help haul the wagon to town. Needed to leave this place. Needed to get his sons home before he lost his nerve entirely. The thought of leaving made his stomach knot, made his chest tight. He pushed the feeling down, buried it deep. Feelings were dangerous. Feelings led nowhere good. Tom was standing there staring at the broken wagon when he heard hoofbeats. Someone approaching from the east, moving slow through the deep snow. He turned in hand, going instinctively to his hip where he wore no gun. Old railroad habit, being cautious about strangers. But as the rider came closer, Tom recognized him. Ezra, Coleman neighbor, and the closest thing Tom had to a friend these days. Ezra sat tall in the saddle despite his 55 years, weathered face split by a grin of relief. Brennan, thought you were heading to town for supplies. When the storm hit, Martha and I got worried. Tom explained about the wagon, about the axle, about Kate's cabin, and the shelter they had found. Ezra listened, nodding, then dismounted to examine the damage himself. He whistled low when he saw the break. That's a blacksmith job, for certain, Ezra said, running his hand along the split wood. You need a new axle forged, not just patched, but I can help you get it to town. Got my draft horse back at my place. We could rig something up, drag it in. Probably take most of a day, but it's doable. I'd be grateful, Tom said and meant it. Ezra Coleman had been a good neighbor this past year and a half. Never pushed, never pried, but always there when needed. Always willing to lend a hand, or an ear, or just silent company. "Ready to go now if you want," Ezra said, glancing at the sky. "Weather's holding. Might as well take advantage while we can." Tom looked back at the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney, his sons inside. Probably still sitting at the table, probably still in the warm glow of Kate's attention. Probably happy in a way they hadn't been in 18 months. "Give me an hour," Tom said, voice heavier than he intended. Ezra's sharp eyes studied him for a moment. The old rancher missed nothing Tom knew. Missed nothing and said little but understood much. "Take your time," Ezra said quietly. "I'll work on rigging up something for the wagon." Tom walked back to the cabin, each step harder than the last. The sun was warm on his face, but he felt cold inside. Cold and heavy, and trapped by circumstances he couldn't change. He was a father. He had responsibilities. He had a ranch to run, livestock to tend, a life to maintain. He couldn't just stay here in this warm cabin with this strange woman who made his son smile. That wasn't how the world worked. That wasn't how life worked. Inside, Kate was clearing breakfast dishes. The boy sat quiet, sensing something wrong. Children always knew, Tom thought. Always felt the shift in adult moods, the tension in the air before storms broke. "There's a neighbor outside," Tom said, voice too harsh, his own pain making him cruel. "He can help get the wagon to town." Benny's face crumpled like paper in a fist. Sam looked down at his hands, shoulders hunching inward. Daniel stood abruptly, walked to the window, stood with his back to the room. 10 years old and already learning to hide his emotions, to swallow his pain, to be the strong one. "We're leaving." Benny's voice was small and broken. Not a question. A realization. "Yes." "No." Benny shook his head, small hands balled into fists. "I don't want to." "Benny, we have to. We have our own home. We can't just stay here." "Why not?" Sam's voice, usually so quiet, cracked with emotion. "Why can't we stay? She needs us. We need her." Tom felt the words like knives, felt them cut through all his carefully constructed defenses, all his determination to do the responsible thing, the right thing, the thing that made sense. "Boys, pack your things," he said, knowing the words were wrong even as he spoke them. "We're leaving in an hour." "She's not your mother," Tom added, and immediately regretted it. The words hung in the air, brutal and true, and wrong all at once. Brutal because they hurt. True because Beth was dead and no one could replace her. Wrong because that wasn't the point, had never been the point, wasn't what anyone was asking for. Benny ran to Kate, sobbing. She gathered him up without hesitation, held him tight against her chest. Over his head, her eyes met Tom's. Everything he needed to know was in that look. Everything he had been trying not to see, not to acknowledge, not to hope for. She wanted them to stay, but she wouldn't ask, couldn't ask. Too much pride, too many years of learning not to hope for things her body couldn't give her. Too much frontier toughness that said you took what life gave you and didn't complain, didn't beg, didn't make yourself vulnerable by wanting things that couldn't be. Kate kissed Benny's head, set him gently down. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but Tom heard the effort it took, heard the iron control that kept it from shaking. "Help your brothers pack." They moved like ghosts, like sleepwalkers through someone else's nightmare. Kate wrapped food for them, hands steady and efficient. Bread, cheese, dried meat, practical supplies for the journey. Her face was a mask, carefully neutral, professional, the face of someone doing their duty without complaint or emotion. A knock at the door, Ezra patient and kind. "Ready when you are, Brennan." The boys climbed into the wagon bed that Ezra had righted. Nobody spoke. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Even Ezra, usually full of frontier stories and rough jokes, kept quiet. He sensed something in the air, something heavy and wrong, that made words impossible. Kate stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. She handed Tom the bundle of food. Their fingers brushed. Both pulled back like they'd touched fire. "Your Beth loved you well," Kate whispered, so quiet Ezra couldn't hear. "They're good boys." Tom heard the goodbye in her voice, heard her releasing them, sending them back to their lives. She thought he realized that he didn't want this, didn't want her. Thought he was leaving because he had to, not because he chose to. Thought she'd done her duty and nothing more. Thank you, Tom managed. The words were inadequate, cowardly, everything he despised. But they were all he had. Kate nodded once, stepped back inside, closed the door. The wagon started moving. Snow crunched under wheels and hooves. Ezra led the way on his horse, Tom driving the damaged wagon that lurched and groaned with every turn. Behind him in the wagon mud, his son sat in miserable silence. They'd gone maybe a quarter mile when Benny spoke into the awful quiet. His voice was thick with tears, but the words were clear. Papa, she's going to be all alone again. Tom's hands shook on the reins. Everything was wrong. The sun was too bright, burning at his eyes. The snow was too white, reflecting light until he could barely see. The wagon creaked with every turn, and each sound felt like an accusation. Each sound said coward, said failure, said fool. Benny cried quietly, broken sobs that tore at Tom's heart. Sam stared at his hands, shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Daniel sat in the back, face turned away, but Tom could see the rigid set of his shoulders, could see the anger and disappointment radiating from his eldest son. Tom's throat was tight. His vision kept blurring, and he told himself it was the bright sun, the reflected glare off the snow. Told himself it wasn't tears. Men didn't cry. Fathers didn't break down. You did what had to be done and you didn't complain, and you kept moving forward because that was what survival required. 18 months of holding everything together. 18 months of being strong for his sons, of keeping the ranch running, of putting one foot in front of the other even when every step felt impossible. And it was all breaking now, a quarter mile too late. She smells like Mama used to, Benny said suddenly, voice steadier despite the tears. But she's not Mama, she's Kate, and we need her. Something inside Tom shattered. All his grief, all his fear, all his carefully constructed walls, everything he'd built to protect himself, to protect his sons, to survive in a world that had taken Beth and left him alone with 3 small boys and no idea how to raise them. All of it cracked apart like ice under spring sun. Beth was gone. He'd been keeping his sons in amber, preserving them like specimens in a jar. Afraid to let life back in. Afraid to move forward because moving forward meant leaving Beth behind. Meant dishonoring her memory. Meant admitting she was really gone and never coming back. But Kate wasn't a replacement. Kate was something else entirely. Kate was a woman alone in that cabin because her body couldn't give her children. Kate was someone who'd carved birds through long winters to keep loneliness at bay. Kate was someone who'd just given his 3 boys something he couldn't give them. Had given them hope. Had given them joy. Had given them a glimpse of what life could be instead of what it had become. And he was riding away. Taking them back to that tomb of a ranch house. Back to burned meals and silence and slow suffocation. Taking them away from the first real warmth they'd felt in a year and a half. Because he was a coward, because he was afraid, because accepting happiness meant risking loss again, and he couldn't survive losing someone else he loved. Tom stopped the wagon. Ezra looked back confused. Brennan. Something wrong. Everything, Tom said, voice breaking. Everything's wrong. Pop. Daniel's voice cracked with sudden hope, with desperate pleading. Tom turned in the seat to face his sons, all 3 of them watching him with expressions that ranged from hope to confusion to desperate need. His boys, Beth's boys, children who deserved better than a father who was too broken to let them be happy. If I went back, Tom said, voice rough with emotion he could no longer suppress. If I went back and asked her, would you want to stay? 3 voices shouted yes so loud that Ezra's horse startled, dancing sideways in the snow. Ezra looked between them, understanding dawning on his weathered face. A slow grin spread across his features, the kind of grin that said he'd seen this coming, had known it before Tom did. Well, don't just sit there, son, Ezra said, still grinning. Some things can't wait. Some things you lose if you don't grab them when you have the chance. Turning the wagon was difficult in the deep snow. The horses balked, confused by the change in direction. Ezra helped maneuver, patient and encouraging. Every second felt like an hour. Every moment of delay felt like disaster waiting to happen. What if she didn't want them? What if he'd misread everything? What if he got there and she turned them away? Finally, they were facing back. The homestead was visible in the distance, smoke still rising from the chimney. Kate was there, alone again. Going back to the life she'd lived before they arrived. Going back to winter projects and carved birds and desperate quiet loneliness. "Go on," Ezra said. "I'll wait here with the boys." "No," Daniel said firmly. "We're coming." Tom looked at his eldest son and saw determination there. Saw a boy who'd grown up too fast but who still knew what mattered. Still knew that some moments required witnesses, required family, required everyone present. "All right," Tom said. "All of us then." They rode back toward the cabin, hearts pounding, hope and terror warring in Tom's chest. He had no plan, no prepared words, just desperate need and the knowledge that turning away had been wrong, that his sons deserved better, that Kate deserved better, that maybe possibly if he had the courage they could all have something better. Inside the cabin, Kate moved mechanically, cleared the table though it was already clear, washed dishes that were already clean. Her hands shook, but she kept them moving. Work was survival. Work was how you got through. Work was what you did when your heart was breaking, and you couldn't let yourself fall apart, because falling apart meant admitting how desperately you'd wanted something you couldn't have. The coffee cups sat in the drying rack. The boys had left them half full, too upset to finish. She dumped the cold coffee, scrubbed the cups clean, but she could still make their small handprints on the ceramic, still remember the weight of Benny in her lap, still feel the ghost of Daniel's awkward hug. 3 days. She'd known them 3 days, and somehow in those 3 days they'd become everything, had filled the cabin with noise and warmth and life, had made her remember what it felt like to be needed, to be wanted, to matter to someone. Now they were gone, and the silence was sharper than it had ever been. Worse than before, because now she knew what she was missing. Before, she'd only imagined having a family. Now she'd had one briefly and lost it, and the loss was unbearable. Kate heard wagon sounds outside, froze at the basin, hands dripping soapy water. They'd forgotten something, she told herself. That was all. They'd forgotten something and come back for it. And then they'd leave again, and she'd have to watch them go twice, and she didn't think she could survive that. But she went to the door anyway. Opened it, saw the wagon, saw Tom climbing down, walking toward her with an expression on his face she couldn't read. Saw the boys in the wagon behind him, 3 small faces watching with desperate hope. Tom stopped 3 feet away. Snow between them, bright and clean and cold. His face was open in a way she'd never seen. Vulnerable, terrified, determined. "Would you consider," he started, and his voice broke. Couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find the words for what he was asking. Kate didn't need him to finish. Didn't need words for what passed between them in that moment. Didn't need explanation or justification or anything except the desperate hope in his eyes, in his son's eyes, in the very air between them. "Yes," she said. The word hung in the frozen air, clear and certain and irrevocable. Tom stared at her like he'd misheard, like his mind couldn't process what she'd said. "I didn't even ask. I haven't said what." "Yes," Kate said again, louder, more certain. "Whatever you're asking, whatever you're offering, whatever this is, yes." Behind Tom, the wagon erupted with noise. 3 boys tumbled out, shouting and laughing and crying all at once. They ran through snow that reached their knees, ran toward Kate like she was home, like she was everything they had been searching for. They hit her all at once, nearly knocking her over. Benny wrapped around her waist. Sam grabbed her hand. Daniel, trying to maintain some dignity, stood close enough to touch. Kate dropped to her knees in the snow, arms around all 3, and sobbed. Not sad tears, something else. Something that had been locked inside her for years. For all the winters alone. For all the carved birds. For all the children she'd never have. All of it breaking free in this moment, in the arms of 3 boys who weren't hers by blood, but were hers in every way that mattered. Tom stood apart, watching his family form. Watching his sons with this woman. Watching Kate hold them like they were precious, like they were gifts, like they were everything she'd ever wanted. And he knew with absolute certainty that turning away from this would have been the worst mistake of his life. Worse than any mistake he'd already made. Worse than all the burned meals and uncomfortable silences and lonely nights put together. Inside, Kate managed, laughing through tears. "Before we all freeze." They tumbled into the cabin, bringing cold air and snow and noise. So much noise. Kate's quiet cabin had never held this much life. Had never been this loud, this chaotic, this perfectly imperfect. Ezra appeared in the doorway still grinning. Guess you won't be needing that ride to town after all. Not today, Tom said. Good man. Ezra tipped his hat to Kate. Ma'am, you've got yourself a fine family here. I know, Kate said softly, and the wonder in her voice made Tom's throat tight. After Ezra left, they sat around the table. The boy bounced with energy, too excited to sit still. But there were practical matters to discuss. Reality to face. Plans to make. Where will we live? Kate asked, voice careful. This place is too small for 5. Tom had thought about this on the ride back, had made calculations, done the math. My ranch, it's larger, closer to town. Better for the boys, better grazing land. We can make it work. When Kate's voice caught on the word, when would we marry? Tom took a breath. This was the leap. This was the moment where everything changed or everything fell apart. Soon as the preacher can do it, soon as the roads are fully clear. Unless, he hesitated, unless you need more time, to be sure. Kate reached across the table, took his hand. First time they'd really touched, really let themselves touch. Her fingers were warm, calloused from work. Strong, real. I'm sure, she said. Benny climbed into Kate's lap without asking permission. His right now, that privilege. Sam leaned against her shoulder. Daniel watched with fierce satisfaction, like he'd personally arranged this miracle through force of will alone. Can I call you Mama? Benny asked, voice small but hopeful. Kate's eyes filled again. She cupped his face with both hands, rough frontier woman hands that had carved birds and treated wounds and survived 3 years alone. I'd be honored, she whispered. Later, after the boys were occupied with Kate's collection of carved birds, she had a whole menagerie of them. From years of solitary winters, Tom and Kate stood by the fire, alone in a room full of people, trying to understand what they'd just agreed to, trying to believe it was real. I need to show you something, Kate said quietly. She led him to her bedroom, to a small hope chest at the foot of the bed. Opened it with hands that trembled slightly. Inside were tiny clothes, baby gowns, small shirts, knitted blankets, all carefully folded, carefully preserved. Years of hoping, of preparing, of believing that someday she'd have children to dress in these clothes. And then years of accepting that she wouldn't, but unable to give them away, unable to throw away the physical evidence of dreams that had died. I made these, Kate whispered, years ago, before I accepted that children weren't going to happen for me. I couldn't give them away, couldn't throw them away, so I kept them. Tom touched a small gown, imagining Kate's hands stitching it, imagining the hope she'd held with each stitch, the grief when that hope slowly withered and died. Save them, he said, for grandchildren. Kate looked at him sharply. Grandchildren. You're young yet, and boys grow up fast. You will have grandchildren, Kate. A whole house full if Benny has anything to say about it. These clothes will be used, just not the way you originally planned. Kate laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Tom pulled her close, careful of his healing shoulder. She fit against him like she'd been designed for that space. Like all the lonely years had been preparation for this moment, for this impossible, improbable, perfect fit. I don't even know your middle name, Kate said into his chest. Thomas James Brennan. Used to be an engineer for Northern Pacific Railroad before I became a rancher. Catherine Rose Collins. Used to be a nurse in Philadelphia before I came west. Tom pulled back to look at her. You were trained in medicine. Kate nodded. 3 years at Pennsylvania Hospital. That's where I met my husband. He was a pharmacist. We came west so he could open a shop in Helena, but he got sick the first winter. I nursed him for 2 years before he died. Tom understood now, the way she'd moved with confidence around his injury. Her knowledge of treatment, her ability to assess medical situations instantly. Kate Wells wasn't just a survivor. She was a professional. She was someone who'd been trained to heal, who'd spent years learning how to save lives. And then she'd spent 3 more years alone in a cabin, those skills going unused, except for the occasional neighbor who needed help. What a waste, Tom thought. What a terrible waste of skill and knowledge and care. Kate should be in a town, should be helping people, should be using all that training. But frontier life had trapped her here in this isolated cabin alone with her carved birds and her unfulfilled dreams. Well, that was going to change. They'd be closer to town at his ranch. Kate could help neighbors, could use her skills, could be the person she was trained to be. Could be more than just a lonely widow counting the years through wooden birds. That evening, after the boys were in bed, exhausted from emotion and excitement, Tom and Kate sat by the fire, not touching, but close, learning each other in the way new couples do in silence, and glances and the slow building of comfort. "Do you ever wonder," Kate asked quietly, "if it was the storm that brought you to me or me to you?" Tom considered. Outside stars blazed overhead through the window, the same stars that had shone on Christmas Eve, but warmer now, kinder, less distant. "Both," he said finally. "God knew we all needed finding." Kate leaned against his shoulder. "Benny asked me today if I thought God made the storm happen so we'd meet. I told him maybe, that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things if we're brave enough to see it." Smart woman, smart boy. They sat in silence for a while watching flames dance. Tom thought about Beth, about the letter she'd left him, about how she'd known somehow that he'd need permission to move on, that he'd torture himself with guilt if she didn't explicitly release him from the vows they'd made. Beth had always been wise, had always seen him more clearly than he saw himself, and she'd loved him enough to free him, to tell him to live to love again, to give their sons the family they needed, even if it meant bringing someone new into the space she'd occupied. "I won't try to replace her," Kate said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "I couldn't even if I wanted to." "You're not replacing her," Tom said carefully. "You're what comes next, what she'd want for them, for me." Inside, Benny cried out in his sleep. Kate rose immediately, went to him. Tom heard her soft voice, heard Benny settle. When she returned, she carried the smooth river stone Benny had given her. She kept it in her pocket, Tom realized. Kept it close always. "Do you know what he told me yesterday?" Kate asked. "What?" He said, "Mama, I'm glad the storm came." I asked him why. He said, "Because now you're not alone anymore. And neither are we." Tom's throat closed. He pulled Kate close and they sat in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead through the window. The lamp burned steady on the sill. Not loneliness anymore. Not survival. Welcome, home, family. But Tom knew challenges still waited. Morning would bring reality, would bring the need to explain to the community, to face questions and judgment, to navigate the complicated path from strangers to family. Would bring the practical difficulties of blending two lives, two households, two sets of grief and hope in desperate need. But tonight they had this, had each other. Had three boys sleeping peacefully for the first time in 18 months. Had hope where there had been only survival. Had the beginning of something that felt like healing. And for tonight, that was enough. For tonight, that was everything. 3 weeks. That's how long Tom tried to make it work back at the ranch. 3 weeks of returning to the life they'd left behind, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. Trying to convince himself that the warmth of Kate's cabin had been an illusion, a moment out of time, that couldn't survive in the harsh light of ordinary days. He was wrong. The first week was the hardest. The ranch house felt colder than Tom remembered, emptier. Beth's things were still everywhere, exactly as he'd left them on Christmas Eve. Her apron hanging on its hook by the stove. Her sewing basket by the chair where she used to sit in the evenings. The dried flowers she'd picked last summer, now brittle and faded, still in their jar on the windowsill. Tom had kept it all like a shrine, had preserved everything as if Beth might walk through the door at any moment, might need her apron, might want to finish the sewing she'd left undone. For 18 months, this preservation had felt like love, like honoring her memory. Now it felt like something else, like a prison, like a refusal to accept reality, like keeping his sons trapped in a moment of loss instead of letting them move forward into life. The boys felt it too. Daniel became quiet and withdrawn, doing his chores without being asked, but without any joy in the work. Just going through motions, surviving each day. Sam stopped talking, again went back to that terrible silence he'd fallen into before Christmas. And Benny cried at night, quiet sobs that Tom could hear through the thin walls, sounds that tore at his heart, but that he didn't know how to stop. Tom burned dinner that first night back. Potatoes scorched black on the bottom, barely cooked on top. The boys ate without complaint, had learned not to complain. But Tom saw Daniel push food around his plate, saw Sam take tiny bites and swallow like each one was an effort, saw Benny's eyes fill with tears that the boy tried hard to hide. They were thinking about Kate's stew, about food made with care, about meals that didn't taste like ashes and failure. The second week, things got worse. A cold snap moved through temperatures dropping to 20 below. The kind of cold that made your lungs hurt, that froze water in the well, that turned simple tasks like feeding livestock into battles for survival. Tom worked from before dawn until after dark, trying to keep animals alive, trying to keep pipes from freezing, trying to hold everything together through sheer force of will. Daniel helped without being asked, but Tom saw the exhaustion in his son's face, saw the 10-year-old boy trying to do the work of a man, trying to carry burdens no child should carry. One afternoon, working on a frozen water line, Daniel looked up at Tom with eyes that were too old, too tired, too empty. "Pa, are we ever going to be happy again?" The question hit Tom like a fist to the chest. He wanted to say yes, wanted to promise his son that happiness was coming, that things would get better. But the words stuck in his throat, because he didn't know if they were true. Didn't know if happiness was possible in this house of ghosts, in this life of barely surviving, in this existence that felt more like slow death than living. "I don't know, son," Tom said finally, and hated himself for the honesty. Hated himself for not having better answers, for not being the father his boys needed. The third week, Daniel exploded. It was Tuesday evening, another burned dinner. Tom had been distracted, thinking about the cattle, about money, about how he was going to afford to replace fencing come spring, thinking about anything except the pot on the stove. The beans had scorched, filled the house with acrid smoke. Daniel stood up from the table so fast his chair fell over backward. "You took us away from her." Tom turned from the stove, shocked. Daniel never raised his voice, never showed anger, never challenged authority. "Danny, sit down. We've talked about this." "We haven't talked about anything. You decided. You just decided we had to leave and we left, and now we're here and everything's terrible, and you won't even admit it. Daniel James Brennan, you watch your tone. Why, what does it matter? Nothing matters. Mama's dead, and you're half dead, and Sam won't talk, and Benny cries every night, and we could have stayed with Kate, but you were too scared." The words hung in the air like smoke. Too scared. His 10-year-old son had seen right through him, had identified the truth Tom couldn't admit even to himself. "She's not your mother," Tom said, voice hard, defensive, wrong. "Mama's dead," Daniel shouted, and his voice cracked on the word. Broke completely. "Mama's dead, and you're keeping us dead with her, living in a grave. She wouldn't want this, Pa. She wouldn't want us to be like this." Daniel ran upstairs to the loft, feet pounding on the wooden steps. Tom heard the creak of the boy's bed, heard muffled sobbing. Sam and Benny sat at the table in stunned silence, eyes wide with shock. They'd never heard Daniel yell before, never seen their older brother break down like that. Tom sat heavily in his chair, head in his hands. His shoulder ached, never had healed quite right. But that pain was nothing compared to the pain in his chest. The knowledge that his son was right, that he was keeping them all trapped in grief because he was too afraid to move forward, too afraid to dishonor best memory, too afraid to accept that happiness might be possible again. That night, after he'd gotten Sam and Benny to bed, Tom went up to the loft. Daniel was still awake. Tom could tell from the boy's breathing, lying there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. "Danny, Tom said softly. "I'm sorry I yelled, Pa." "Don't be, you were right." Daniel rolled over to look at his father. Even in the dim light from the lantern Tom carried, he could see surprise on the boy's face. Tom sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "Your mama loved us so much that even dying she thought about what we'd need. She left me a letter, told me to let love in again, told me not to keep you boys trapped in grief. And I've been doing exactly that. Keeping us all trapped because I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of forgetting her. Afraid that moving forward means leaving her behind. Afraid that being happy again means I didn't love her enough the first time." Daniel sat up, young face serious in the lamplight. "But Kate's not trying to make us forget Mama. She's different. She's Kate. And Pa, we can love both of them. Our hearts are big enough. Mama would want us to be happy. She'd want us to have Kate." Tom pulled his son into a hug, held him tight. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been thinking about it a lot," Daniel said into his father's shoulder. "Every night since we left. Thinking about how we felt at Kate's house. How it was different. Not better than when Mama was alive, just different. Like we could breathe again. Like being sad was okay, but so was being happy. And Pa, I miss that. I miss feeling like it's okay to be happy. The next morning, Tom went to check on his cattle and found that one of the cows had gotten tangled in old barbed wire during the night. The animal was cut badly, bleeding from multiple wounds. Tom worked for an hour to free her, getting cut himself in the process, his hands torn and bloody by the time he was done. The cow limped away, but Tom thought she'd survive if infection didn't set in. He stood there in the snow, hands bleeding, exhausted and cold, and at the absolute end of his resources. And he thought about Kate, about her medical training, her gentle competence, the way she'd treated his shoulder on Christmas Eve. If Kate were here, she'd know what to do about these cuts, would clean them properly, would know what herbs or medicines to use, would take care of it efficiently and well. But Kate wasn't here. Kate was 15 miles away in her cabin alone again, carving birds to survive the winter. And Tom was here bleeding and broken, trying to survive alone when he didn't have to be alone, when he'd chosen to be alone out of fear and stubbornness and misplaced honor. When Tom got back to the house cold and hurting, he found Sam standing at the window. The boy had been there for who knows how long, just staring west, toward where Kate's homestead lay, too far away to see but close enough to long for. "Sam," Tom said gently. "You all right, son?" Sam didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the question. The silence that had taken him after they'd left Kate's place had gotten deeper, more complete. The boy who'd started talking again at Kate's cabin, who'd asked questions and laughed and engaged with the world, had retreated back into himself. Tom tried to remember the last time Sam had spoken. 3 days, 4, the fourth night of the third week, something changed. Tom went to bed exhausted, shoulders aching from 12 hours of winter ranch work. He fell asleep quickly, dreamlessly, the sleep of absolute exhaustion. He woke to wrongness, not a sound, but the absence of sound. The particular silence that meant something was missing from where it should be. Tom sat up, heart already pounding. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, in the cold air, in the quality of the darkness. He lit a candle, climbed the ladder to the loft. Daniel and Sam lay sleeping, curled under heavy quilts. Benny's bed was empty, the blankets thrown back carelessly, and there on the wooden floor, small wet footprints. Snowmelt, leading from the bed to the ladder, to the door downstairs. Tom's blood turned to ice. He rushed down the ladder, nearly falling in his haste. Pulled on his boots, his coat, grabbed a lantern, opened the door to bitter cold and saw them. Small footprints in the fresh snow, child-sized, leading away from the house. West, toward where Kate's homestead lay, 15 miles distant. Benny had left hours ago. Tom could tell from how the snow had already started to fill the tracks. 3 hours, maybe 4, and the temperature had dropped. The thermometer by the door read 12 below zero. Wind chill would make it worse, much worse. A 5-year-old boy, lone in the Montana winter darkness, walking towards something 15 miles away that he couldn't possibly reach. Would freeze to death trying. Was probably already frozen. Tom couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Terror like nothing he'd felt since Beth died crashed over him. He'd failed his son. His grief, his cowardice, his stubborn refusal to choose happiness had driven his youngest child out into the killing cold. He woke Daniel with shaking hands. "Benny's gone. He's walking to Kate's. I'm going after him. Stay here with Sam. Keep the fire going. Don't leave the house for any reason, you understand?" Daniel's face went white. "Pa, he'll freeze." "I know, that's why I'm going now. Bar the door after me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Ezra." Tom saddled his horse in record time, hands fumbling with frozen buckles. Every second mattered. Every moment of delay could be the difference between finding Benny alive or finding his small, frozen body in a snowdrift. He rode hard into the darkness, following the wandering trail. The tracks told a story that made Tom's heart clench with anguish. At first, they were purposeful, determined. Benny walking with 5-year-old confidence toward his goal. But after a mile, they started to waver. Weaving slightly, the child was getting tired, getting cold, starting to lose his sense of direction. 2 miles. 3. The tracks became more erratic. Benny had fallen several times. Tom could see the small, body-shaped impressions in the snow. Each time the boy had gotten up, kept walking, kept moving west, toward Kate, toward the woman he loved. the woman who needed him. 4 miles, sure. Tom was calling out now, screaming his son's name into the darkness. Benny, Benny, where are you? Nothing, just wind and darkness and the terrible certainty that he was too late, that his son was already gone, that his cowardice had killed his child. 6 miles. The tracks were barely visible now, filled with blown snow. Benny had been falling more often, getting up slower. Hypothermia would be setting in. Confusion, disorientation. The deadly cold that made you think you were warm made you want to lie down and sleep. Tom almost missed him, almost rode past in the darkness, but something made him look to the right to a small drift beside a scrub pine, and there, barely visible, a patch of dark cloth against white snow. Tom was off his horse before it stopped moving, fell to his knees beside the small shape. Benny, Benny, no, please, no. His son lay curled in the snow like he was sleeping, lips blue, face pale as death, body shaking with violent tremors that meant he was still alive, still fighting, but not for much longer. His coat was open, one mitten lost. Classic signs of severe hypothermia. The paradoxical undressing that came right before the end. Tom stripped off his own coat, wrapped Benny in it, pulled his son against his chest, feeling how cold the small body was. Too cold, dangerously cold. Tom lifted him onto the horse, climbed up behind him, held him close, and rode. Not home. Home was 8 miles back. Ezra's ranch was only 3 miles southeast. 3 miles that Tom covered at a gallop that risked killing the horse but might save his son. He pounded on Ezra's door. Horse heaving beneath him, Benny limp in his arms. Ezra opened the door in his nightshirt, took one look, and shouted for Martha. Martha Coleman moved with practiced efficiency. She'd been a nurse during the war, had seen hypothermia before. She stripped Benny's frozen clothes off, wrapped him in warm blankets straight from the bed, placed him by the fire but not too close, began rubbing his hands and feet gently, carefully, trying to bring warmth back without causing more damage. Tom sat beside his son, holding Benny's small hand, weeping. Great, racking sobs that he couldn't control, couldn't stop. His boy, his baby, nearly dead because Tom had been too coward to choose love over fear. An hour passed, the longest hour of Tom's life. Slowly and possibly, color began to return to Benny's face. The violent shivering eased. His breathing steadied. When Benny's eyes finally opened, Tom bent over him, tears still streaming. Benny, thank God you're alive. Benny looked at his father with eyes that were too old, too knowing, too wise for 5 years. I was going to Kate, he whispered, voice hoarse. She's all alone, Pa. Someone has to be with her. She's dying too, just slower. From lonely. The words hit Tom like bullets. Each one found its mark, tore through his defenses, shattered the last of his carefully constructed walls. You almost died, Tom said, voice breaking. But Kate's dying too, Benny repeated, with perfect 5-year-old logic. Just slower, and we could save her. We could save each other. But you won't let us. Tom pulled his son close, held him gently, carefully, afraid of breaking him. You're right, he whispered. You're right about everything. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ezra stood in the doorway, our arms crossed. That boy's got more courage in his little finger than most men have in their whole body. He was willing to die to save someone he loves. Question is, Tom, are you willing to live for the same reason? Tom looked at his youngest son, the child who'd nearly frozen to death, trying to fix what his father had broken. Looked at Ezra, the friend who'd been patient with his grief but was patient no longer. Looked at Martha, who'd saved Benny's life, and was now looking at Tom with expectation. Yes, Tom said. Yes, I'm willing. Then what are you waiting for? Ezra asked. Son'll be up in 3 hours. Soon as the boy's strong enough, you take him home. You talk to Daniel and Sam, and then all 4 of you ride to Kate's. You don't go alone this time. You take your sons, because they're part of this. They choose her as much as you do, and you ask her properly. You ask her like a man who knows what he wants and isn't afraid to fight for it. Tom nodded, couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat, but he nodded. Benny fell asleep against his father's chest, finally warm, finally safe. And Tom sat there in Ezra Coleman's house and made a promise. To Beth, to his sons, to himself, to Kate, waiting alone in her cabin. He promised that he'd be brave, that he'd choose love over fear, that he'd live instead of just surviving. When morning came, they would ride to Kate's, all 4 of them, And Tom would ask the question he should have asked 3 weeks ago. He'd beg if he had to, he'd grovel, he'd do whatever it took, because his 5-year-old son had been willing to die for love. And Tom Brennan was damn well going to learn to live for it. That afternoon, Tom made a decision. He saddled his horse and rode to Ezra Coleman's ranch, found the older man in his barn mending tack. Ezra looked up, took one look at Tom's face, and set down his work. What happened? Tom told him everything. About the 3 weeks of struggling, about Daniel's outburst, about Sam's silence, about his own realization that he was failing his sons by trying to preserve a past that was dead instead of building toward a future that could be alive. Ezra listened without interrupting. When Tom finally ran out of words, the older man nodded slowly. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know. That's why I'm here. I need advice. You need advice. Ezra's eyebrows rose. Tom Brennan, you're one of the smartest men I know when it comes to engineering, to building, to solving problems. But when it comes to your own heart, you're dumb as a fence post. Tom almost smiled despite everything. Tell me something I don't know. That woman saved your lives, took you in, cared for your boys, showed you all what happiness could look like. And you left because you were scared. Now you're back here being miserable, your boys are miserable, and she's alone in that cabin being miserable. And you're asking me what to do. It's not that simple, Ezra. It's exactly that simple. You go back there, you apologize, you ask her proper. You court her right with the whole town watching so nobody can say it's just convenience or desperation. You show her and everyone else that you're choosing her, that she matters, that this is real. What if she says no? Then at least you tried. At least you were brave enough to ask. But Tom, that woman looked at you and your boys like you hung the moon. She's not going to say no. She's probably sitting in that cabin right now wondering why you haven't come back, wondering what she did wrong. Women always think it's their fault, you know. Always think they weren't good enough, weren't pretty enough, weren't whatever enough. You need to go tell her she's enough, that she's everything. Tom rode home as the sun was setting, Ezra's words echoing in his head. That night he couldn't sleep, lay awake thinking about Kate alone in her cabin, thinking about the Ma's, about how they'd come alive at her place and slowly died back at the ranch, thinking about Beth's letter about her plea that he let love in again. He'd been so focused on honoring Beth's memory that he'd forgotten to honor her wishes. She'd asked him to live, asked him to let their boys have full lives. And he'd been doing the opposite, keeping them all half alive, trapped in grief, refusing to move forward. The next morning, Tom made breakfast without burning it. A small victory, but it felt significant. The boys came down, surprised to find food that was actually edible. They ate in silence, but Tom saw Daniel watching him, cautious hope on the boy's face. Boys, Tom said when breakfast was done, I need to tell you something. They looked up at him, 3 pairs of eyes, waiting, hoping, afraid to hope. I've been wrong about a lot of things, about keeping your mama's things like she was coming back, about thinking that moving forward meant forgetting her, about leaving Kate's place when we should have stayed. Benny's eyes went wide. Sam's head came up first. Real attention Tom had seen from him in days. Daniel leaned forward, his body tense. I'm going to fix it, Tom said. I'm going to go back to Kate's. I'm going to apologize, and I'm going to ask her properly. Ask if she'll let me court her. Ask if, maybe if she's willing, she might consider becoming part of our family. Really? Benny's voice was barely a whisper. Really, Bud, I need to know something first. If I do this, if I ask her, and she says yes, are you boys all right with that? Because this isn't just about me. This is about all of us. This is about building a family. And I won't do it unless you're sure. Yes, Benny shouted, jumping up from his chair. Yes, yes, yes. Sam's voice, rusty from disuse but clear, said, please, Pa, please go get her. Daniel just nodded, but his eyes were bright with tears and relief. All right then, Tom said, feeling something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and painful for weeks, for months, for the entire 18 months since Beth died. I'll go tomorrow. I'll talk to her. And boys, I promise you I'll do this right. I'll court her properly. I'll show her she matters. I'll make sure she knows this is real, that we're choosing her, that she's not just convenient or useful, but wanted for herself. That night, Tom went through Beth's things, not to pack them away, not to erase her, but to make room, to create space for someone new while still honoring who'd been there before. He kept the important things, the things the boys might want someday. Her wedding ring to give to Daniel when he was grown. Her favorite shawl, soft blue wool that still smelled faintly of the lavender she used to tuck in her drawers. The family Bible with her handwriting in the margins, notes she'd made during sermons, prayers she'd written down. But the daily things, the things that had kept the house frozen in time, he began to put away. The apron came off its hook. The dried flowers were buried respectfully. The sewing basket was moved to the attic, not thrown away, not destroyed, but put away. Preserved for memory, but not for daily haunting. As he worked, Tom found himself talking to Beth. Felt foolish, but did it anyway. "I met someone," he said to the empty kitchen. "Her name's Kate Wells. She's a widow too. Lives alone, has for 3 years. And Beth, she's wonderful with the boys. They came alive around her. Really alive, not just surviving. She's kind and capable and strong. She has this quiet strength, like you did. Different, but the same too." He folded the apron carefully, held it against his chest for a moment. "I'm going to ask her. Going to court her proper. And if she says yes, if she'll have us, I'm going to marry her. I hope that's all right. I hope you're not hurt or angry up there in heaven. I hope you know I'll never forget you, that the boys will never forget you. But we need to live, Beth, like you said in your letter. We need to live, not just survive." The kitchen was silent. No miraculous sign, no divine confirmation. Just Tom alone with his dead wife's apron and his own hopes and fears. But somehow in that silence he felt peace. Felt like maybe Beth really would approve, like maybe she really did want this for them. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Tom woke the boys before sunrise. "We're going to Kate's," he said. "All of us, right now." They dressed in record time. Benny was so excited he put his shirt on backward and didn't care. Sam actually smiled, first real smile Tom had seen in 3 weeks. Daniel helped his brothers get ready with gentle efficiency, the responsible oldest child making sure everyone had warm clothes, warm boots, everything they'd need for the ride. Tom saddled the horses, hitched up a small wagon for the boys. His hands shook as he worked. What if Ezra was wrong? What if Kate had moved on, had decided she was better off alone? What if Tom got there and she turned him away? But he was doing this anyway, was taking the risk. Because his boys deserved a chance at happiness, and so did he, and so did Kate. And the only way to get that chance was to be brave enough to ask for it. They set out as the sun was rising, painting the snow gold and pink. The journey to Kate's homestead took 3 hours, horses moving carefully through deep snow. The boys were quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the heavy silence of grief, but the anticipatory quiet of hope. As they got closer, Tom's heart pounded harder. He could see smoke from Kate's chimney. She was there. That was good. That was the first hurdle. Now he just had to find the courage to knock on her door and say the words that would either change everything or confirm that he'd lost his chance. They pulled up in front of the cabin. Tom helped the boys down from the wagon. All 4 of them stood there for a moment looking at the door. Looking at the place that had felt more like home in 2 days than their ranch had felt in 18 months. "You boys wait here," Tom said. "Let me talk to her first." He walked to the door on legs that felt unsteady, raised his hand to knock, and froze. Through the window he could see inside. Kate was at her table carving. Another bird, Tom realized. Another winter project to mark another season alone. Her head was bent over her work, dark hair falling forward to hide her face. She looked smaller than he remembered. More alone, in Tomdom. The cabin that had felt so warm and alive with his family in it now looked empty despite Kate's presence. Looked like what it was, a place where someone survived rather than lived. Tom knocked. Kate looked up, startled. She wasn't expecting visitors, that was clear from her expression. When she saw who it was through the window, her face went through a complicated series of emotions. Surprise, hope, fear, and then carefully constructed neutrality as she rose and came to the door. She opened it, stood there, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. "Mr. Brennan," she said, voice carefully polite, carefully distant. "Kate," Tom said, and his voice came out rough. "Can I talk to you?" She glanced past him, saw the boys in the wagon. Her face softened for just a moment before she controlled it again. "Of course, come in." She stepped back, let him enter. The cabin was exactly as he remembered. Clean, sparse, warm from the fire. The carved birds on the windowsill had been joined by a new one still unpainted. Another mark of time passing. Another winter survived alone. The boys, Kate said, not quite a question. They're fine. Can I bring them in? They're cold. Kate nodded and Tom went to get his sons. They came in quietly, subdued by uncertainty. Kate looked at them, and Tom saw her face crack slightly, saw the love there barely contained. She'd missed them, he realized, had missed them as desperately as they'd missed her. Hello, boys, Kate said softly. Hi, Miss Kate, Benny whispered. She looked at Tom, then questions in her eyes. Why are you here? What do you want? Are you going to hurt me again by leaving? Kate, I need to apologize. Tom started. 3 weeks ago, I made a mistake. I left when I should have stayed. I took the boys back to the ranch because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. What was responsible. What honored my wife's memory. But I was wrong. Kate listened face neutral, but Tom saw her hands gripping her shawl tightly, saw the tension in her shoulders. Tom explained everything. Beth's letter, Daniel's outburst, Benny's desperate walk into the freezing night, his own realization that he'd been keeping them all trapped in grief. I'm asking if you'd let me court you, Tom finished, properly, with the whole town watching. I'm asking for a chance to show you that you matter, that this is real, that I'm choosing you, not settling for you. Kate was silent for a long moment. Her face was carefully controlled, but her eyes were bright with pain. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but firm. No. The word hit Tom like a bullet. Behind him, he heard Benny gasp, felt his son's devastation like a physical blow. No. Tom's voice was barely a whisper. No, Tom. Kate's voice shook but didn't break. I won't be your second choice. I won't be the woman you come to when you finally run out of other options. I deserve better than that. Kate, you're not. I am. Her voice rose slightly. You left Tom. You chose to leave. Chose your grief over happiness. Chose fear over love. And now you want to come back and I'm just supposed to say yes. Supposed to pretend the last 3 weeks didn't happen. Supposed to forget how it felt to watch you walk away. Kate, please listen. I said no. She started to close the door. Mama Kate, please. Benny's voice desperate and breaking. Tom turned to see all 3 boys scrambling out of the wagon running through the snow. They crashed into Kate before she could shut the door, pulling her down into the snow with the force of their embrace. All 3 sobbing, begging, clinging to her like she was the only thing keeping them from drowning. Please don't say no, Benny cried into her shoulder. Please, we love you, we need you. We're sorry Papa was scared, but he's not scared anymore. Please give him another chance. Kate held them, her own tears falling now. She looked at Tom over their heads, and he saw everything in her eyes. The hurt, the love, the desperate hope she was trying to kill but couldn't. Get inside, she said finally, voice rough. All of you, before we freeze to death. They stumbled into the cabin. Kate dried her eyes, steadied herself. When she spoke again, her voice was firm. If I agree to this, I have conditions. Real conditions, Tom, not just words. Anything, Tom said. You don't just court me, you prove it. You introduce me to everyone. You make it clear I'm not convenient. You tell me about Beth, so I'm not competing with a ghost. And you give me time, however long it takes for me to trust this again. Can you do that? Tom met her gaze, saw the challenge there, the hurt that needed healing. Yes, I can do that. I will do that, for however long it takes. Kate looked at the boys who watched with desperate hope, looked back at Tom, saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Certainty, commitment, true love. All right, she said softly. All right, you can court me. But Tom Brennan, if you break my heart again, there won't be a third chance. I won't, Tom promised. I swear to you, I won't. Over the next 4 weeks, Tom courted Kate properly. He rode to her cabin twice a week, always with a chaperone. Sometimes Ezra and his wife Martha, sometimes another neighbor family. He brought small gifts. Nothing expensive or inappropriate, just tokens that showed he was thinking of her. Fresh eggs from his hens. A book of poetry he'd seen her looking at in the general store. A new carving knife when he noticed hers was getting dull. They talked during those visits. Really talked. Tom told her about Beth, about how they'd met, how they'd courted, how she'd been as a wife and mother. It hurt to talk about, but it also helped. helped him remember Beth as a whole person, not just the idealized saint he'd been making her in his grief. Helped him see that loving Kate didn't diminish what he'd had with Beth, that his heart was big enough for both. Kate told him about her husband, Michael, about the pharmacy they'd planned to open, about the long illness that had taken him, about the loneliness of the 3 years since, about the carved birds in the hope chest, in the slow acceptance that some dreams don't come true the way you plan them. But sometimes, she said during one visit, dreams come true in different ways. Better ways, maybe. I'll never have babies of my own, but I have 3 boys who need a mother. That's not what I planned, but it's what I needed. Tom brought the boys to visit too, always supervised. Kate taught them things. Taught Daniel to read weather signs the way clouds moved and what they meant the way animals behaved before storms. Taught Sam about medicinal plants, showed him which herbs could help with different ailments, let him help her prepare remedies for neighbors who came asking for help. Taught Benny to carve his small hands under her larger ones, learning to shape wood into beauty. The town noticed, of course the town noticed. Nothing stayed secret in a frontier community where everyone knew everyone, and gossip was the primary entertainment. Tom took Kate to church on Sundays, introduced her formally to families he'd known for years, made it clear through every action that this was a courtship, that Kate Wells mattered to him, that this wasn't convenience or desperation, but choice. Some people approved. Ezra and Martha were openly supportive. The younger families were happy for them, but others were less certain. The older women, led by Abigail Hartford, had reservations. Mrs. Hartford approached Tom after church one Sunday. Kate was talking with some of the younger wives, the boys playing nearby. The older woman's face was stern, but not unkind. "Mr. Brennan, a word." "Of course, Mrs. Hartford." "I knew your Beth," she said without preamble. "She was a fine woman, a good mother. She deserved more time than she got." "Yes, ma'am," Tom agreed, not sure where this was going. "And I know Catherine Wells. She's been a good neighbor these 3 years. Helped birth Martha Coleman's twins when they came early. Treated old John Peterson's pneumonia last winter, probably saved his life. She's skilled and kind and capable." "Yes, ma'am." "But this seems fast, Mr. Brennan. Beth's only been gone 18 months. Folks are wondering if you're honoring her memory or just looking for someone to cook and clean and mind your boys." Tom felt anger flash hot in his chest, but he controlled it, remembering that Mrs. Hartford had lost her own husband. Young had raised 3 children alone. She wasn't being cruel. She was being protective. "Mrs. Hartford, may I tell you something in confidence?" She nodded. Tom pulled Beth's letter from his pocket. He carried it everywhere now, a talisman and a reminder. "Before Beth died, she left me this. It's a letter. In it, she asked me to promise I'll let love in again. She begs me not to keep the boys trapped in grief. She says she wants us to have full lives, not half-lives lived in her memory." He handed the letter to Mrs. Hartford, watched her read it, saw her face soften as she worked through Beth's words. "She gave you permission," Mrs. Hartford said softly. "More than that, she asked me to do this. And I fought it, ma'am. I fought it for 18 months. I kept the house like a shrine. I burned meals and fell apart and nearly lost my boys to grief. And then we met Kate, and for the first time in a year and a half, my boys were happy, really happy. And I realized that honoring Beth's memory doesn't mean preserving everything in amber. It means living the way she wanted us to live." Mrs. Hartford handed back the letter. Her eyes were damp. "She was a wise woman, your Beth." "Yes, ma'am. And you're a good man, Thomas Brennan. Stubborn and slower than molasses sometimes, but good. Catherine Wells is lucky to have you, and you're lucky to have her." "I know, ma'am." "Then you have my blessing. For what it's worth, from an old widow who's seen too much sorrow in this world. You have my blessing and my support." Word spread from there. If Abigail Hartford approved, others would follow. By the end of week 4, the whole town knew that Tom Brennan was courting Kate Wells properly and seriously, and with honorable intentions. 2 weeks later, the debt case came before Judge Henderson. Tom and Kate sat in the territorial courthouse, surrounded by neighbors who'd come to testify. Ezra, Martha, John Peterson, others who Kate had helped over the years. Hiram Wells sat across the aisle with his lawyer, confident and smug. But when Samuel Rogers, Tom's lawyer, presented the case, everything changed. He showed documentation of Kate's continuous residence, affidavits from neighbors about her medical work, proof that Michael Wells' debt had been contracted before marriage and was therefore not Kate's legal responsibility under territorial law. More importantly, he revealed something Hiram hadn't counted on. Michael Wells had written to Kate before he died, explicitly stating that any money borrowed from Hiram was Michael's personal debt and should not burden his wife. The letter witnessed by the town doctor was legal evidence. Judge Henderson studied the documents, then looked at Hiram with cold eyes. "Mr. Wells, this court finds no legal basis for your claim against Mrs. Brennan's homestead. The debt, if any, died with your cousin." Case dismissed. Hiram stood face red with anger and humiliation. He left the courthouse without a word, returned to Philadelphia within the week. The town never saw him again. Outside the courthouse, Kate turned to Tom, relief washing over her face. "It's really over." "It's over," Tom confirmed. "Your land is secure, your home is safe," and soon he smiled, "It will be our home," which meant it was time for the next step. Tom brought Kate to the hilltop overlooking the valley, the place where he and Beth used to come, where they'd plan their future, where they'd dream their dreams. He wanted Beth to be part of this in spirit, if not in flesh. Wanted her blessing, even though he knew from her letter that she'd already given it. It was late afternoon, the sun painting the sky golden pink. Snow still covered the ground, but there was a softness to it now, the first hint that spring would eventually come. Kate stood beside him, looking out over the valley. Beautiful in her simple way, strong and capable and kind. "Beth and I used to come here," Tom said. "This was our spot." He felt Kate tense beside him, but he pressed on. "I wanted to bring you here because this is where she told me she was pregnant with Daniel. This is where we planned our life together, and I wanted her to be part of this somehow. Wanted her here in spirit for what I'm about to ask." Kate's hand found his, squeezed gently. Tom turned to face her, took both her hands in his. "Catherine Rose Wells, you saved my life. You saved my son's. You showed us how to live again instead of just surviving. You're strong and kind and brave, and you deserve every good thing in this world." He dropped to one knee, saw her eyes go wide. "Would you do me the honor of being my wife, of being a mother to my sons, of building a life with us? I know I'm not much of a prize. I'm a widower with 3 boys and a ranch that barely turns a profit and more grief than any one person should carry. But I promise you I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I'll honor you and care for you and never take you for granted. I'll make sure you know you're chosen, you're wanted, you're loved. So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Kate pulled him to his feet. "You don't kneel for me, Tom Brennan. We're partners, equals." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." They kissed for the first time on that hilltop as the sun set over Montana territory. Kissed with the ghosts of their pasts, blessing them, and the hope of their future spreading out before them like the valley below, vast and beautiful and full of possibility. The wedding was 2 weeks later, small and simple in the town church. The whole community came, even those who'd had doubts, because a frontier wedding was a community event, a celebration of 2 people choosing each other, a family being formed, of life continuing despite hardship and loss. Kate wore her best dress, dark blue with lace at the collar that Tom had bought for her in the general store. Simple and practical, but beautiful. She carried a small bouquet of winter greenery that Benny had gathered for her, tied with ribbon that Sam had carefully chosen. Tom wore his only suit, brushed clean, mended where it needed mending. The boys stood as witnesses, scrubbed and combed, and wearing new shirts that Kate had made for them. They stood proud and solemn, understanding that this was important, that this was the moment their family was made official. Reverend Samuel Price, old and weathered and wise from 62 years of living, led the ceremony. He'd been a chaplain in the war, had seen death and suffering, and knew the value of love found in the aftermath of loss. "Dearly beloved," he began, voice still strong despite his years. "We are gathered here to witness the joining of Thomas James Brennan and Catherine Rose Wells in holy matrimony. But we are also here to witness something more, the formation of a family, the healing of grief through love, the courage it takes to hope again after loss." He spoke of Beth, acknowledging her memory, honoring her place in this family's history. He spoke of Michael Wells, Kate's first husband, recognizing that first loves never truly leave us, but make room for new loves if we're brave enough to accept them. The vows were traditional, simple words that had been spoken by countless couples over countless years. But when Tom promised to love and cherish Kate in sickness and in health, his voice broke. When Kate promised to honor and care for Tom and his sons, tears ran down her face. They exchanged rings, simple silver bands that Tom had commissioned from the town's silversmith. Nothing fancy or expensive, but well-made solid meant to last. And then just as Reverend Price was about to pronounce them, husband and wife, Daniel stepped forward. "Reverend Sir, could we say something?" Price looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, son." Daniel turned to Kate. Sam and Benny moved to stand with him, a united front. Tom watched his son's heart full to bursting with pride and love. "Miss Kate," Daniel said, voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "We wanted to promise something too. We know you're marrying Pa, but we want you to know you're not just getting a husband. You're getting us. And we want to make promises to you, if that's okay." Kate's hand flew to her mouth. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak. Daniel took a breath. "I promise to help you, to carry wood and water, to watch my brothers, to be the man Pa's teaching me to be. I promise to respect you and listen to you and try my best to make you proud." Sam spoke next, voice soft but clear. "I promise to always tell you when I'm sad or scared or confused. I promise to learn from you, to remember what you teach me. I promise to help with the little things, to do my chores without complaining, to be good." Benny, smallest and youngest, looked up at Kate with absolute love in his 5-year-old eyes. "I promise to love you forever and ever, like I love Mama Beth in heaven and you here with us. I promise to hug you every day and tell you you're pretty and help you even when I'm tired. And I promise to always keep that river stone safe, the one you gave back to me, so we can remember the storm that brought us together." Kate dropped to her knees, arms around all three boys, sobbing. Not sad tears, but joy tears. Years of loneliness breaking open into family. Years of believing she'd never have children, dissolving in the reality of three boys who chose her as much as she chose them. Tom joined them, arms around all of them, his family. Broken pieces that had somehow fit together into something whole and beautiful and right. Reverend Price's voice was thick when he spoke again. "I now pronounce you husband and wife and family. What God has joined together, let no one separate." The church erupted in applause and cheers. The community witnessing not just a marriage, but a transformation. Not just two people joining, but 5 people becoming one family unit, whole and healed and full of hope. At the reception in the church hall, Mrs. Hartford approached Kate with a small wrapped package. "For you, dear, something for your hope chest." Kate unwrapped it to find a beautifully embroidered baby blanket. Her breath caught. "For the grandchildren," Mrs. Hartford said with a small smile. "Because families grow in unexpected ways, and who knows what the future holds." Kate hugged the older woman, understanding the gift for what it was. Acceptance, blessing, hope that the future held more than just survival, but actual joy. That evening, after the celebration wound down, the family went home. Not to Kate's small cabin, not to Tom's ranch house, but to their home. Tom had spent the past weeks preparing the ranch house. Not erasing Beth, not removing her completely, but making room for Kate. Beth's hope chest was in a place of honor, filled with mementos the boys could look through when they wanted to remember. But Kate's things were there too. Her carved birds on the windowsill, her medical supplies in the kitchen, her presence filling the spaces that had been empty for too long. The boys ran through the house with the energy of children released from the strictures of best behavior. Kate watched them smiling, then turned to Tom. "This is real," she said, as if testing the words. "This is really happening." "This is real," Tom confirmed. "You're really my wife. They're really our sons. This is really our home." "Our home," Kate repeated, tasting the words. "I like the sound of that." That night, after the boys were in bed, exhausted from excitement, Tom and Kate sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching stars wheel overhead. The same stars that had shone on Christmas Eve, but warmer now, kinder, full of promise instead of threat. "Do you ever think," Kate asked quietly, "about how close we came to missing this if the storm hadn't hit? If you'd taken a different route? If I hadn't lit the lamp that night?" "I try not to," Tom admitted. "It's too terrifying to think about. All the ways this could have not happened. But it did happen. We found each other. Or maybe Kate smiled up at the stars. Maybe Beth and Michael arranged it. Maybe they're up there glad we're not alone anymore. Maybe, Tom agreed. He liked that thought, liked imagining Beth happy for him, relieved that her boys had a mother again, pleased that Kate had a family at last. 3 months passed. Spring came to Montana, snow melting, green returning. The ranch came alive with new growth, new possibilities. Kate's medical skills became invaluable to the community. Neighbors came from miles around when they were sick or injured, knowing that Catherine Brennan, as she was now called, could help. Tom saw her come alive in that work using skills she trained for doing the job she was meant to do. The boys thrived. Daniel learned ranching from his father, but also compassion from Kate. Sam found his voice again stronger than before and discovered a love for healing work, often helping Kate with her patients. Benny remained the heart of the family, freely giving love and affection, keeping everyone connected. One morning in late May, Kate woke feeling strange, nauseous, tired in a way that was different from ordinary exhaustion. She ignored it at first, wrote it off as something she'd eaten, a stomach bug going around. But it persisted for days. Finally, knowing it was impossible but needing to check anyway, she examined herself, used the medical knowledge she'd learned in Philadelphia to assess her own condition, and came to a conclusion that seemed impossible. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Kate and Tom sat on the porch as had become their habit. Stars overhead, companionable silence between them. Kate held Tom's hand, gathering courage. "Tom, I need to tell you something." His heart clutched. The fear never fully went away, he'd realized. The fear that happiness was temporary, that loss was always waiting. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's actually—" Kate's voice broke. "Tom, I'm pregnant." Time stopped. Tom stared at her, unable to process the words. "What?" "I know. I can barely believe it myself. Dr. Miller in town, I went to see him to confirm. He can't explain it. Says sometimes bodies surprise us. Says I'm about 6 weeks along." Tom still couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Pregnant. Kate was pregnant after 3 years of nothing with her first husband. After doctors had told her it was impossible. After she'd accepted that she'd never carry a child of her own. 3 years I tried with Michael. Kate said, tears streaming down her face now. 3 years of hoping every month and being disappointed every month. 3 years of doctors telling me something was wrong with me, that my body wouldn't cooperate, that I should accept being childless. And now 3 months with you, and she broke down completely sobbing. Tom pulled her close, his own tears falling. "It's more than okay. It's a miracle. Kate, it's a miracle." They held each other under the stars, crying and laughing at the same time. Crying for the years of loneliness and loss. Laughing for the unexpected gift, the impossible blessing. "Beth would be happy," Kate whispered. "She is," Tom said with certainty. "I know she is. She wanted us to live, Kate. Wanted us to be happy. Wanted us to build a life. And look at what we've built. 3 boys who are thriving. A home that's full of love. And now this. A baby. Our baby." Inside the house, they heard movement. Benny calling for water. Kate started to get up, but Tom stopped her. "I'll get it. You rest." He went inside and got water for Benny, tucked the boy back into bed. Benny was already half asleep again, comfortable and secure in a way he hadn't been since Beth died. Tom watched him for a moment, this child who'd had the wisdom to see what his father couldn't, who'd recognized Kate as the answer to prayers no one had known to pray. When he returned to the porch, Kate was touching her still flat stomach with wonder in her eyes. "A baby," she said softly. "Our baby. Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" "Doesn't matter," Tom said. "Healthy is all that matters. The boys will be so excited." "They will, Daniel especially. He's been wanting to help more, wanting to take on responsibility. Having a younger sibling will be good for him." They sat in silence for a while, hands intertwined, futures suddenly brighter than they'd dared imagine. Eventually, Kate spoke again. "Tom, thank you." "For what?" "For coming back. For having the courage to come back that day. For asking me. For all of this." She gestured at the house, the ranch, the life they'd built. "For choosing me when you could have stayed stuck in grief. For letting me be part of your family." "Our family," Tom corrected. "It's our family now. has been since that day on the hilltop. And Kate, I'm the one who should be thanking you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken widower and his 3 broken boys, for making this house feel like a home again, for bringing life back into all of us. We saved each other, Kate said simply. That's what people do when they love each other. They save each other. Winter returned as it always did in Montana, but this winter was different. The house that had been a tomb was now filled with life, filled with boys laughing and arguing and playing, filled with Kate's gentle presence, her medical work, her quiet competence, filled with Tom's steady strength, his careful care of family and ranch, his growing confidence as a father who was present, engaged, whole. And through it all, Kate's belly grew. The boys were ecstatic when they were told. Benny immediately started making plans for the baby, talking about all the things he'd teach his new brother or sister. Sam became protective, constantly asking if Kate needed anything, if she was feeling well. Daniel took on more responsibility without being asked, shouldering the burden of oldest sibling with maturity beyond his years. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the storm that had changed everything, the family sat around their table. Kate, heavily pregnant, now glowed in the lamplight. Tom looked at his family, at the boys who were no longer lost in grief, at the woman who'd brought them all back to life, at the baby growing in her womb, and felt gratitude so profound it hurt. I want to say something, Tom said, and everyone looked at him. A year ago tonight, we were lost in a storm. We could have died out there. Should have died, probably. But we didn't. We found a light in a window, found Kate, and she saved us. You saved me too, Kate said softly. We saved each other, Tom agreed. And I just want to say here on this anniversary with all of us together that I'm grateful. For storms that bring us home, for courage to ask for what we need, for love that comes when we're brave enough to accept it. For family, Daniel added. For second chances, Sam said. For Mama Kate, Benny finished, and the baby, and for being happy again. They joined hands around the table. Tom led them in grace, thanking God for food and shelter and family and love, thanking God for bringing them through darkness into light. Outside, snow began to fall. Gentle this time, not the blizzard of a year ago, but soft flakes that painted everything white and clean and new. Inside, the lamp burned in the window. Not a beacon of desperate survival, but a symbol of welcome, of home, of family gathered warm and safe against the winter cold. And in that moment in that house, there was peace. There was tree. There was love multiplied beyond what any of them had thought possible. There was healing hard-won and precious. There was hope for the future, for the baby coming, for the life they were building together day by day. Tom Brennan, widower and father survivor, looked at his family and knew that Beth had been right. Life was for the living, love was for the brave, and happiness, hard-earned and carefully tended, was possible even after the worst losses. The storm had brought them together, but it was courage that kept them together. Courage and choice in the daily decision to build something good from broken pieces. They were home, finally, truly, completely home.